There's a battered Ford idling on the edge of a Texas back road, June sun hammering through the metal roof. Inside that car, you're hit with a wall of heat and stink. Sweat, old gasoline, greasy fried chicken bones, and the kind of blood smell that just clings to everything. This is where you really meet Bonnie Parker during the gang's lowest run, not the Hollywood version. She's sprawled across the back seat, her right leg bundled in filthy rags that have become part of her skin, still oozing and never close to clean. Every time she shifts, the bandages tug at raw flesh. Pain is her constant passenger. There's barely enough room to stretch, and even less comfort. A pile of empty soda bottles, a crumpled sandwich wrapper, and a fly that seems to think it's here for the catering. Forget the jazz-slick car chases. The reality was a rolling sick room. Freedom meant 4 or 5 adults crammed hip to hip into a stolen Ford V8, everything sticky with sweat, grease, and leftover beans. Outlaw romance? Try surviving on cold canned food, wilted bologna sandwiches, and watered-down soda, all while living in a space where the only privacy comes when someone turns their head. Their worst enemy wasn't just the law. It was their own bodies breaking down hour after hour, wound after wound. Bonnie's leg, for one, never healed. The famous injury came from a 1,933 car wreck. Their Ford flipped, battery acid splashed across her thigh, and her skin burned down to the bone. After that, she could barely walk. Bandages fused to her wound in the Texas heat. Every change meant peeling away flesh. No doctor, no hospital. Not even clean water. Medical help equaled instant arrest, or worse. So they did what desperate outlaws do. They improvised. Clyde Barrow, limping himself after a prison hacksaw stunt cost him 2 toes, would pull the car over at some muddy creek when he could. Bonnie's leg would go up on the open door, hoping for air-dry relief, or just leaving it to bake and attract flies. The luxury item? A stolen bar of ivory soap if anyone managed to swipe one from a general store. Most of the time, wound care meant dirty socks, ripped bandanas, and strips torn from whatever clothes hadn't already turned into bandages. Every wound forced a grim decision. Do you waste precious water to rinse a bandage, or do you save it to drink later? Should you wrap the leg in a shirt, or save that scrap of cloth for tomorrow? Sometimes it was down to baking soda or home remedies remembered from childhood, anything to mask the smell of infection that kept hanging in the air. Pain was constant, and every mile brought a new bit of arithmetic. How much longer could Bonnie take it? Was that fever from infection or just the heat? Was Clyde's limp getting worse? In that car, there were no good choices. Bonnie's wound throbbed and dripped, the bandages growing tighter every hour. Sleep was never more than a negotiation with pain, jolted awake by every pothole or sudden swerve. Each snack or broken nap hammered home the truth that this was endurance, not glamour, hour by hour, wound by wound. Being on the run didn't give them a break from pain. You can't just shift in your seat and escape it. That Ford wasn't just a getaway car, it was a rolling crime scene, a sick room on wheels, and most days, a barely functioning kitchen. Bonnie's leg might be propped on a wadded-up coat, a box of ammo, or whatever bottle was handy. Every bump sent a jolt through her burn, and all Clyde could do was grip the steering wheel a little tighter and hope she didn't cry out loud enough to get them noticed. Sometimes he'd mutter an apology. Usually, Bonnie grit her teeth and stayed quiet. Survival depended on silence. And Clyde wasn't any better off. His foot missing 2 toes turned every hour at the wheel into its own torture session. Most days, he drove in dirty socks, shoes tossed aside because the pain was worse with them on. There was no relief. The road rattled, his foot bled and crusted, and every escape left a new blood stain to replace the old. The inside of that Ford was its own filthy ecosystem. Piles of dirty laundry, pistols and shotguns shoved under seats, greasy food wrappers, money from whatever job hadn't already been spent, and enough chicken bones to keep every fly in Texas happy. The floor was a compost heap. Cigarette butts, wrappers, bullet casings, and napkins all blended together. On hot days, the smell hit you like a punch. Sweat, spoiled food, infection, gun oil, each fighting for dominance. On cold nights, breath fogged the windows, and the only warmth was from body heat or the memory of a campfire. As for meals, forget the movies. The real menu? Cold beans straight from the can, bologna on stale bread, maybe a stolen piece of chicken if things broke their way, canned peaches if you were really blessed. Drinks? Watered-down Coke or Dr. Pepper stretched to last. No forks or plates, just pocket knives and dirty hands. Napkins? If you bothered, it was a torn rag, probably used for something else yesterday. The most ambitious meal might be a hoe cake cooked over a campfire, unless paranoia or gunfire ended dinner before it started. A lucky coin might buy some gum, the closest thing to dessert they ever got. Hygiene was a fantasy. Nobody undressed, not even to sleep if you can call those cramped, nervous dozes sleep. Most nights the gang curled up with revolvers still in hand. Feet jammed under boxes or bags, always ready to jump at a sound outside. If there was a creek nearby, you splashed your face with muddy water and hoped it kept the flies off. A bar of soap was a rare treasure. There's even a story about someone dropping a bar of ivory in a creek, and it nearly led to a fist fight. Imagine being so desperate that you'd brawl over floating soap. Then there's the weather. In summer, the car turned into a sauna. Sweat pooled under bandages, clothes glued to skin, flies swarming every wound. Crack a window, and the mosquitoes feasted. Close it, and you nearly choked on the stink. In winter, Bonnie's leg got wrapped in whatever scraps were left, risking rot just to keep her muscles from seizing up in the cold. Bodily logistics? Forget privacy. If nature called, you did what you had to step outside in the dark or use a bottle, hoping no one looked. Bandages were changed in the open, with someone watching the road. Dirty wrappings, either tossed in the brush or saved to dump miles away. Always moving, never anywhere safe. The psychological toll was its own silent passenger. After a while, sleep deprivation, pain, filth, and fear all blurred together. Every car passing by could be the law. Every rest stop, a risk. There's nothing romantic about a life where your pillow is a sack of dirty laundry and your lullaby is the buzz of flies and someone groaning in pain. Meanwhile, the outside world kept buying the myth. Newspapers ran stage photos of Bonnie and Clyde sly grins, shiny pistols, like they'd just stepped off a movie set. But the truth was 5 grown adults jammed in a filthy car, eating cold beans with a pocket knife, fighting over soap. If Hollywood really wanted to capture it, they'd hire the sweatiest, most miserable actors they could find and make them film in August, with no air conditioning and a swarm of real flies for good measure. Let's cut through the last bit of romance. Bonnie's leg was so burnt, Witnesses said the bones sometimes showed through. Infection was constant. Some mornings, her wound was stuck to her bedding, and changing bandages meant ripping off more skin. Clyde's foot was so chewed up, some days he could barely walk, let alone run. His socks crusted with blood and dirt, every mile behind the wheel, making it worse. There's no swagger in those famous photos once you know what their bodies were really going through. Every hour in that Ford, the biggest threats weren't always bullets or police. It was festering wounds, untreated infections, and exhaustion that made every decision harder and every argument meaner. Even what passed for comfort, a stolen soda, a muddy wash, a short burst of sleep, only reminded them how far they'd fallen from any fantasy of outlaw glory. All the while, that Ford kept rolling, mile after mile, carrying its cargo of pain, fear, and the sour stink of reality. And there was no finish line. The longer they ran, the more their bodies and minds broke down. Bonnie's leg wasn't healing. Infection was always waiting. Even good days, a cold soda, a stolen bite of chicken vanished under layers of pain and exhaustion. Sleep didn't bring relief. It just delayed the next round of misery. Always another day in the same car, with the same wounds and the same stink. Mobility, the one thing keeping them ahead of the law, became a new trap. Bonnie could barely get out of the car without help. Clyde's limp grew worse every week. When escape came down to running, sometimes their only shot was to drive straight through gunfire and hope the car or their battered bodies could take one more hit. It didn't matter how many new cars they stole. Inside, it was always the same. Weapons, wrappers, Bonnie propped in the back, Clyde restless up front. That Ford wasn't freedom. It was a rolling prison where the jailers were pain, infection, and fatigue. If you want the real image that kills the legend, just try to picture the smell after a week inside that car. Sweat, blood, spoiled food, gunpowder a lot closer to a slaughterhouse than a speakeasy. Then came the last ride. Bonnie and Clyde's final morning wasn't any different from the rest. Sandwiches, soda, Bonnie reading a magazine in the front seat, surrounded by clutter and the sticky residue of a life in flight. And then dozens of bullets, glass exploding, steel and flesh hammered by gunfire. The Ford, which had been both their sanctuary and prison, became a butcher's shop in seconds. Lawmen arriving at the scene found a horror show. Blood pooled in the seats, glass shards stuck in wounds, the car reeking of death and old food, flies gathering before anyone even pulled the bodies out. Souvenir hunters swarmed, scrambling for bloody hair, scraps of clothing, turning the death car into a grotesque circus. Even morticians got nightmares. There were so many bullet holes that embalming fluid spilled right back out onto the floor. Bonnie's festering leg, Clyde's mangled foot, handling those bodies was a challenge all its own. The stench and the mess were so overwhelming, people vomited at the scene, and the undertakers had to work in shifts. That's the real cost. The legend of Bonnie and Clyde wasn't born out of romance or outlaw glamour, but from the sheer horror their bodies endured right up to their final, ugly ending. The myth survives because the truth is almost too much to look at. Crippled outlaws, trapped by pain, exhaustion, and wounds that never heal. Hollywood gave us the pretty version. The real Ford 5.8 was pain, blood, and exhaustion until the very last mile. If you're as fascinated or unsettled by the true underside of American outlaw legends as I am, stick around. Drop a comment to tell me which story you want dismantled next. And hit subscribe for more history with Hollywood's gloss peeled straight off.